John Henry was an American folk hero and a railroad worker who raced a machine to prove humans could still outperform automation. John Henry proved that a machine couldn't replace him. Today, people say that soon, game development will all be done by AI. So I decided to test that claim myself. I spent 2 hours making a game in Gamemaker Studio. Then I gave AI the same challenge. I was inspired to perform this challenge because I've seen some people give up on game dev, believing that AI will take over completely. And though I previously dismissed these claims as ridiculous, some measure of doubt crept into my mind. It is the modern era after all, and railroad work is likely done by machines nowadays. Was John Henry a tragic tale of one who died naively standing in the path of progress? Have I underestimated the power of AI? And is it better than human creativity at making games? If you've never heard of Betteridge's Law of YouTube titles, you may have clicked on this video with that very same question. So, to settle our doubts once and for all, I've come up with a challenge. I will make as complete a game as possible in 2 hours, and then AI will make me a game as complete as it can in 2 hours, with my assistance as needed. We will compare the art and the gameplay to each other, and try to objectively determine which game is better. Here's the time-lapse of me making my game. Now, when I started this challenge, I fully expected to be able to make a better game than AI could. I have over 5 years of experience using Gamemaker Studio too, and if you've ever seen some of my other content, you know that I specialize in these kinds of challenges. But I wasn't prepared for what the AI would end up doing. So for my game, I decided to make a very simple Galaga-esque game. As part of the challenge, I wanted to make something as close to a real game as I could. AI was pretty good at making simple, unrefined games, so I wanted to include multiple enemies and a boss, which of course required the art and the programming for those elements. I made the art as quickly as possible, yet I still wanted it to be unique. Instead of ripping off Galaga directly, I made the sprites thematically similar yet distinct. We have an astronaut blasting alien heads using only his finger. I did this because later I wanted AI to try to copy what I had made as closely as possible to test how good AI could interpret my creative vision. I didn't spend a lot of time to perfect my art, and it doesn't look very good, but it has some, we'll call it personality. I also wanted to use some of Gamemaker's features to see if AI could make use of them as well, so I used paths to move my enemies around the screen. I also wanted a functioning game loop so the player is able to die and the game reset. Basically, I wanted to test AI's knowledge of Gamemaker. Game loops, paths, animations such as animated backgrounds, and particle effects such as explosions when an enemy dies are features that I wouldn't expect from a beginner game developer. What I was truly trying to do is test how experienced with Gamemaker AI was. Theoretically, AI has the same knowledge that your internet browser does, so it might seem knowledgeable in overcoming some complex programming challenges. But I don't want to test one area of game design, or to test AI's ability to overcome one problem. I want to test how well AI can take those concepts and put them together to make a finished project. So we aren't testing AI's knowledge, but its skill to make something complete. In my eyes, that would put its ability above that of a beginner game developer. So in the end, this is what I made. It took a little under 2 hours to complete. It features 2 types of enemies that enter the game in waves. After a wave, the enemies charge the player, moving down screen and out of view. After that, the boss spawns, which shoots directly towards the player. When it dies, it plays a short animation, and then the game system goes back to spawning normal enemy waves. There's a rudimentary difficulty system that allows normal enemies to shoot at you on the second round and above, and it theoretically gets more difficult. When the player dies, a short animation plays and the game restarts. It may look simple, but a beginner might struggle with some of the concepts I used in this game, especially when you consider the 2-hour time frame. Alright, now let's start with the part you've all been waiting for. Let's see how well AI can duplicate my work. First off, let's set some rules. The goal is not for AI to make its own game. I want it to try to make the exact same game that I made. The idea here is to mimic a developer who has a very clear vision in their head for their game, and to test how well AI can execute not its vision, but the vision of the developer in question. I also don't want to do any work at all. I want to simulate the experience of a non-programmer or a beginner programmer as much as possible, so I was very hands-off on the programming and the art. As long as it fit in my vision of the game, I wouldn't edit the code in any way, and only edit the art so that it worked with the gameplay. Now, I know that there are some very sophisticated AI tools out there, but I attempted to use exclusively the free and most accessible tools, not the best ones. I am still trying to mimic a novice game dev on a budget. I wasn't going to use the most expensive stuff. Now it could be that the better the AI tool, the better the results. So keep in mind, we aren't going to see necessarily the best of AI here. However, I have some doubts that the higher tiers are necessarily better than what we would get from the standard AI. Here's why I think that. It's possible to do something like train AI on specific pieces of art or code, but at that point you'd either have to steal art and code from other people, or make it yourself. Which makes me question why you would even bother trying to generate it if you already have a source of acceptable art and code. As far as I understand it, ChatGPT gets its code and art training from the internet. This means that if something is incomplete on the internet, it will be reflected in the code AI gives you. There's plenty of text tutorials on the internet, but I sincerely doubt you can piece a full game together just from code snippets you find online. This is why I don't think the higher tiers of AI would necessarily be better, because they still have to be trained, and if a standard AI can't be trained well enough on just what's out on the internet, then it really makes me doubt that there's enough possibility, enough training content out there to actually teach the AI what it needs to do. So, with ChatGPT open in one tab and a free image gen AI open the other, I dived into remaking my game. The first thing I did was ask ChatGPT to make a Galaga game for me. It gave me some solid directions and even provided the exact code I needed to copy and paste. It told me what objects to create and which events to put in them. Right away though, there were a few differences from my original game. For example, it added a score system, which my version didn't have. I also noted it included this random draw set font line. Surprisingly, it didn't break the game, but also didn't do anything. That might seem harmless, but it's actually one of the worrying things about AI-generated code. You end up with these strange, meaningless lines cluttering your project, and in a larger game, that kind of mess can absolutely come back to cause problems later. Once the basic framework was set up, I needed sprites, so I took the free AI image generator I found online for a spin. And honestly, I was kind of impressed with the results. The AI managed to make art that looked surprisingly close to what I originally had. One of the biggest issues with AI-generated pixel art is that it usually comes out way too large or doesn't actually look like true pixel art at all. But after shrinking the images down and doing a little editing, they turned out decent enough. That said, it definitely took longer than making the art myself did in my original project. The process was annoying, the colors were weird, and the art styles clashed pretty hard from sprite to sprite. Still, for this project, it looked acceptable. I think if I had controlled the resolution myself for my game, the pixel art would have looked a little bit better. Instead, I let the AI decide the resolution, and this is what we ended up with. At this point, the game AI made was technically functional. Enemies would move down the screen, the player could shoot, and the score updated. But it still wasn't the game I actually wanted to make. There was no fail state, no boss fight, and overall, it felt pretty bare bones. I generated an image for a green enemy bullet, which AI struggled with for some reason, and started trying to make the game closer to my original version. While ChatGPT was making the code for the enemy bullets, I noticed something interesting. This line here, y plus equals speed. Now, if you know anything about Gamemaker, you probably know that simply putting an object's direction in speed variables is enough to move it automatically. That's the system I used in my version of the game. It's also the system ChatGPT used, but for some reason, ChatGPT also added y plus equals speed. At first glance, it doesn't seem like a huge issue. All it really does is move the bullet manually using y plus equals speed, while Gamemaker is already moving it automatically through the direction and speed system, effectively doubling the movement speed. But I'm sure it won't cause any problems later. The first hour actually went pretty smoothly, all things considered. There was a few simple errors, but ChatGPT was able to fix the problems that it made for itself. And remember, I was trying to stay as hands-off as possible. If ChatGPT caused the game to crash, then ChatGPT had to fix it with minimal input from me. By the 1 hour mark, we had enemies spawning, players shooting, and the game resetting properly. A solid start. But then I started trying to add more complicated systems. Enemy pathing, waves, and a boss fight. This meant introducing more complex game states, and I was really curious to see how ChatGPT would handle it. The pathing sort of worked. The enemies ended up behaving similarly to my original game, staying mostly stationary, but also created these massive safety zones in the corners of the screen where the player couldn't get hit. Interestingly, the system ChatGPT used was actually pretty similar to mine, a switch state system controlling enemy behavior. But even after I explained exactly how the diving enemies were supposed to work, ChatGPT really struggled with it. It kept introducing bizarre bugs, and no matter how many times I pasted the errors back into ChatGPT, it couldn't fully fix them. At this point, I started getting worried about the timer, so I asked ChatGPT to move on and make a boss fight. Of course, it immediately added extra features that weren't in the original game, like a health bar. Not necessarily bad features, but ChatGPT seemed weirdly obsessed with adding random mechanics nobody asked for. Then, around an hour and 20 minutes in, my browser froze. I refreshed the page, and because I hadn't bothered logging into ChatGPT, the entire conversation history was gone. From that point forward, things got dramatically worse. I think that ChatGPT had been relying heavily on memory, remembering the systems it previously added and trying to keep everything compatible. But once the refresh wiped that context away, it basically forgot how the game worked. And after that, it started tripping over itself constantly, introducing more and more bugs. At about the 1 hour 30 mark, I ran into a problem with the boss bullets. The goal was simple: make the boss shoot directly at the player, the same way I had it in my original project. But somehow, the bullets would still miss even if the player stood perfectly still. This bug took a little while to solve. I already knew the issue was with the unnecessary y plus equals speed line ChatGPT added earlier, but ChatGPT didn't know that. I eventually had to step in and figure it out myself. Now, you could blame the browser refresh for this, but since ChatGPT had probably forgotten that part of code existed. But even after I pasted the relevant code back in, it still kept suggesting these ridiculously over-engineered solutions. Technically, some of them worked, but the actual fix was literally just deleting that one line. With time running out, I wanted chat to separate the game states so the enemies and boss would spawn during different phases. And this is where everything completely fell apart. ChatGPT's newest changes caused the game to stop spawning enemies and bosses altogether. At this point, it was already obvious that the AI-made game was far worse than my original version. There were no animations, the art was janky, but at least the game's mechanics technically worked. But once we tried adding this final feature, the entire project basically imploded. I was honestly shocked by how badly the AI managed to sabotage itself. I even tried fixing it manually, but by then I was mentally checked out, and the code had become such a tangled mess that I barely understood what anything was doing anymore. I kept fighting with it even after the 2-hour timer ended, but nothing worked. In the end, the game no longer spawned bosses at all. It would only generate 4 waves of enemies before freezing completely and doing absolutely nothing. In one final move, ChatGPT managed to break both the long-term gameplay and the boss fight at the exact same time, leaving behind a broken mess that wasn't even remotely close to the game I had originally made. Now, when I started this challenge, I never really expected for AI to make a game better and more efficiently than I could, but I really did expect it to make a functioning game. I expected a working game loop, but the way ChatGPT self-sabotaged was frustrating. The game basically wasn't playable. Given what I've seen, it would be easier to learn Gamemaker than it would be to use only AI to make your game. You're going to struggle with getting AI to interpret your creative vision. You're going to struggle making it look appealing. You're going to struggle to make the game actually function. From what I see, AI is below a beginner's skill level. Could that change in the future, or with better tools? Maybe. God only knows what the future holds. But even if something like AI programming was improved, I have my doubts that it'd be easy to use AI to execute a vision or make something appealing. Prompting AI is going to take time and effort, and getting AI to make appealing art isn't simple. Currently, people can tell the difference between real and AI art, and most gamers don't want to support AI art. So, could AI, as of right now, make better and more financially viable games than me? Nope. I think it could be possible to make money with AI content, but I don't think that will make it impossible or more difficult to make money with human content. I also don't think that using AI, even if AI is really efficient, to make content for money would really be that successful. Could AI in the future make better and more financially viable games than me? That's the $1 million question. Investors claim that AI will be able to, but they also claim that NFTs would be the next best way to monetize games, and that the Ouya game console would make a ton of money. If I could round this video off with one more little story. Moissanite is a diamond substitute that doesn't occur naturally in the wild. It's cheaper, it has a similar hardness, and it has a higher refractive index, meaning on paper, it's technically shinier. However, people still buy and use diamonds, because even if something is on paper cheaper, more efficient, and of comparable quality, there's still something about real diamonds that gives them meaning that moissanite lacks. Ultimately, I don't think AI will replace real devs. It might speed up development processes and could help you learn faster, but I doubt the human element can ever truly be removed. But what do you think? This video has been one of my longest and most complicated videos yet, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts about the games I've made here, and what you think the future of AI will be. If you've appreciated this video, I'd appreciate a like. If you want to see more of my work, be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely evening.